doing 12s, all 12s, right?
Yep, this one's all 12s.
So in the midst of all of the controversial ads that I felt were rightly controversial, one that wasn't controversial at all, that was the first one that I saw that I was disgusted by, was a very mainstream ad by Amazon. Did you see this one about Siri losing her voice? And so they brought all of these celebrities in to provide the voice for Siri. And so you had like Anthony Hopkins reprising his Hannibal Lecter role, you know, and scaring people. And you had some other folks that I didn't really know. And then you had, and I have not heard one thing about this ad. This is what irritates me. You had, what's her name? Rebel Wilson. So you had Rebel Wilson naked in a tub with some bubbles, who was asked about something, travel directions or something. And I'm hesitant to say this over the airs, but you're just going to have to flow with me, because this was, I've heard zero about this. This was not a controversial ad, and it's Amazon, about as mainstream a company as you can get, right? She started talking about how, oh, you're hot and you're sweaty and you're in the bush. And she went on and on about how you find yourself in the bush, and they kept going on and on with this dirty, nasty talk about, and I don't think I need to explain. Right? But this is what was so irritating about me. This is mainstream. Kids are watching, and this has not been on of the controversial.
No one's talked about
this. And I thought it was one of the dirtiest ads I'd seen, because it was so mainstream. Like, really? Amazon? Like, Jeff Bezos was on there. He FaceTime for Jeff Bezos. And we've got some serious, explicit sexual innuendo going on.
I mean, the good news is that goes over the kids' heads, but the issue is...
that's the thing. I doubt that it does.
Younger kids, that's going to go over their heads. But either way, people know that this is a family time. Families are together. Everyone's around the TV. It's not being monitored whether this little kid's in front of the screen right now. And so I think that that's where there's that responsibility with the halftime show, with what's being said in the commercials, that there's a responsibility for kids who will be around.
Which I feel like, and they kind of have, you know, we used to have all the GoDaddy commercials, and and there was a lot of like stuff we didn't want to watch. And I sort of feel like they tamed some of that down, and the halftime shows have been cleaner the last few years.
I don't know. Was anyone else nervous that JT was performing again? The repeat, was it 2004, 2006, the Janet Jackson? We yanked her shirt off.
Anyway, I was irritated that's where we've come to, where that didn't even like raise a, no one even's like blinked at that.
This is what I think is interesting about the commercials. There were so many commercials, I think, somewhat change oriented. Whether or not they were effective, again, is another question. But it shows the fact that, I don't know if this is part of a response to what's happening with the Me Too movement and how Hollywood's responding, but there was this attitude of you can make a change. Whether or not they were good examples, that's debatable, but there's this idea that was being pushed forward that you can do something. And I think that that is something right now that a lot of people are waking up to, the idea of people who are maybe asleep, and after seeing really the expose of, hey, look at all these people who have been sexually abused, you can do something.
I get that, but what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to buy the Stella chalice or the Jeep or the whatever. I mean,
I think this is the response, though. Them trying in some way not to be as sex positive as they usually are.
Fair enough. Yeah. Right. Instead of buying the glass for $13 and having Stella Artois pocket all of that money and make you feel better, or buy a Hyundai and have Hyundai do something, why don't you actually do something, is all I'm saying. Like, you could actually find a way to serve, actually do what Martin Luther King Jr. said to do in his sermon. Don't buy the stuff and put money in somebody else's pocket. Actually go and serve. That would be a good response, I think.
No, so like Catholic Comes Home type of ad. Oh man, wouldn't that be awesome to put an ad in like that?
Yeah.
I think those things would be great. I mean, we've seen pro-life ads in the past. Scientology.
Did you see the Scientology ad? Oh, my
Let's learn about Scientology.
Yes.
Come on, Catholics. Let's get a Catholic ad up there. We've had some pro-life ones. Let's get a Catholics come home ad.
What cracked me up about the Scientology one, again, service and Scientology. So one of the reasons Scientology, in fact, probably the only reason Scientology is a thing, is that they're actually really good at going out and serving people. Like, that's how people get into their church, is that, they go and help you with your dyslexia or whatever it is they do. They go and serve. And people are attracted by that. And that's what we should be doing as Catholics. What's crazy about the Scientology thing, of course, is that the ad was like, aren't you curious? Don't you want to know? And if I was a Scientologist, that's the last thing I would be putting out there. I would be putting out how we help you with stuff. Because if you actually want to go into a Scientologist station or whatever. And,
you can't.
Well, one thing you can, but if you, let's say you want to know, all right, start forking over some money, a lot of money, and by the time you get to level 8 or 10 or 12 or whatever it is, we'll start to explain our actual theology to you, what we believe. And we'll start to explain that we believe that Xenu, the intergalactic warrior, arrived here from a different galaxy millions of years ago and deposited people in a volcano. And this was all written by L. Ron Hubbard, a science fiction writer, by the way, in the mid-20th century. It's all just so much nonsense that I was like, wow, I was sort of shocked that they would even ask people to explore that, because they hide it. I mean,
right.
They hide what they actually believe. You have to pay all that money. So
it was a moment of
interesting.
Curious much? Come and see. Well, and what was interesting about the Scientology ad, it copied one of my favorite ads, probably for about 6 or 7 years ago, when you had Google and they typed in like some cutesy you're watching as they type in one letter at a time, and they're doing it's saying stuff like cutesy I love you and so forth, but everyone was captivated as you saw one letter at a time being put in there. And so it's funny to see years later they were kind of taking that similar look of the ad that aired on the Super Bowl years ago.
Right. Before we leave all of the consumerism, one more quick story. Doritos, apparently, and I don't think this was an ad, but yesterday it announced, or recently it announced, that it would be changing their chips, or at least making another brand of chips that would appeal more to women. And the new Lady Doritos, as the internet started calling them, apparently would be, I don't know, a little less dirty, I guess. And I'm not sure what all they were going to do. I think
dirty?
A little less, like, sticky. You know
less dirty.
Like Doritos are very, you get all that orange stuff, I guess, over you. And so I think they were going to have less of that. And anyway, there was outrage and fury over this. That they would...
It's sexist.
That they would consider making a chip for women. How dare you make a chip for women? How dare you even mention women? Just on the way in here, Timmerie, I was literally following a car down Garden Grove Boulevard right here, and it said, in the future, there will be no gender. That was the big sticker in the back window. And I'm like, do you honestly believe that? And what does that even mean? And I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman driving. I didn't get it, but I just thought, and if you're a woman, I feel really, really bad. Because here's who gets the brunt of this, as we always talk about. And I feel like even with the Doritos thing, as stupid as all of this is, you know who gets the silliness about this? Women. Women women who are opposed to this. First of all, why are you so adamant that women must be just as slobby and, I feel like what you're trying to do is make the eating experience of your chips a little less slobby for women. And because men don't care, they're just going to get dirty and get orange stuff all over their face. And the women are like, no, we can be just as slobby as men. I feel like that's always the case.
Well, I think what's funny, I'll never forget, years ago, I was speaking at an all-women's event. It was a mother-daughter tea. And I was sitting at the front table, and the mom's sitting there, and they have these beautiful tablecloths. The women come in these beautiful dresses. A lot of them bought new dresses, right? Some of them are even wearing hats, and here's all of this fine china. There are these metal tongs that you can pick up the cookies and the different pastries with. And this woman at the table, I'm about to speak, and she's trying to pick up this little crumpet or something and put it on her plate. And she's having a hard time picking it up. And after probably about 30 seconds of trying to pick up this cookie, she sets down the tongs, looks at the whole table, apologizes, picks a cookie up, bright red in the face, like a tomato, sets it down on her little plate, and then just sets her hands, folds them in her lap, and just sits there looking at her cookie, totally embarrassed. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, the guys are getting together today while the ladies are away. What are they eating? Finger foods.
Yeah,
They're probably wearing gym shorts. They didn't buy a new outfit for the other guys to see. They're probably playing sports or doing something, and I was just laughing. The difference between men and women, like the advertising community knows this. Even research communities know this. Even the way that drugs have an impact on our body, not just based on weight and size, but based on the male-female brain and how the brain responds to certain types of sleeping medications. It's just so interesting when people try to obliterate these lines, how funny it is because it backfires in the long run. It really, truly backfires. And it makes me think of a really awesome piece that came out this last week, and we'll probably continue talking about this, of Bishop Chaput. Bishop Chaput was recently speaking in Arizona at an all-men's leadership conference, and he had basically an excellent response to the Me Too campaign without specifically citing it. And he talks about how essentially, it's not going to be feminist lectures or mass media man-shaming or any type of reward show with public statements that's going to change how men are interacting. It's not going, if anything, he says, it'll breed nominal repentance and inner resentment. But he said what a man really needs is he needs a change of heart for the better. And he talks about how transforming a man means giving meaning to his life and how that's where you'll see a change in men. And he talks about new men in this awesome piece.
Yeah, it really gives a great piece. And the whole idea that men need meaning, they need purpose, I think is absolutely key. And we will have more on that when we come back.
For anyone on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, Twitter, please, thank you for joining us. I hope you guys are enjoying the show. I will just put a plug in here. If any of you are interested in calling in during the show, I know it's actually much easier to write out your question or thought and share it with us so that we can communicate it. But if you'd like to call in, our call-in number is 714-282-6034. Again, that is 714-282-6034. Feel free to call in. We love to hear your questions today, or comment sharing your questions as well. And I would love if anyone listening right now happened to be at Archbishop Chaput's speech this last week in Arizona. I would love to hear your thoughts and hear more about the speech. I can't wait to pull up the full speech and listen to the entire thing. I've only gotten an awesome synopsis with some fantastic quotes. Ready?
Yeah, you want me to bring us back in this?
I can bring us in.
Okay.
This week, Archbishop Chaput was speaking at an all-men's leadership conference in Arizona, and he gave a fantastic speech to men, encouraging men. And I think that we are at a turning point right now where we've seen so much content that is pro-woman that we've not done enough lately to develop and encourage men. And this is something that Archbishop Chaput has done incredibly well. And, without specifically mentioning the Me Too campaign, he addresses it and how, basically man shaming isn't going to change anything, but giving that purpose and meaning behind life will drive men forward with the fighting spirit that is essentially ingrained in men.
We've talked about this before, just interpersonally, how men don't generally react well to women sort of nagging them and hectoring them and lecturing them. It just doesn't generally work, especially, I just might throw this as a little side note, especially when women who are doing that consistently try to downplay the distinctives of male and female, right? All of that doesn't work well either. If you're going to deny femininity and then call men to be better men, I mean, that doesn't follow either. But Archbishop Chaput, you're right, had a wonderful talk, and he says that we need to relearn our history a little bit. And he goes back to Europe and the knights, and he talks about how knighthood in medieval Europe began as a profession of heavily armed male thugs, men that were obsessed with vanity, violence, and rape. And what changed all that was the church. It took a while. It took a few centuries, but the church came in and provided the meaning and purpose to sort of redirect some of those instincts that men have. Yeah, men sort of do have that fighting instinct, that protective instinct. That now, do they have an instinct to be violent and rape? No, I don't think so. But if you let some of the sort of natural male, especially in our fallen state, if you unleash that without the moderating, holy making influence of the church and holy women, by the way, that can go wrong. But when you direct it to the right sort of things, as he notes, C.S. Lewis called Christianity actually a fighting religion. When you direct it towards fighting the true fight, fighting a fight for holiness and building up families and building up society, then men can become pretty spectacular beings, actually.
Absolutely. Well, and this is where he's pointing to the example of the Knights Templar and how they went from this thug-like rape type of atmosphere to that, like you said, redirecting, Don. And what happened is here were all of a sudden men who wanted to live a life of prayer, a life of poverty, a life of obedience. And so what happened, therefore, as a result of this exemplary masculinity, these men, because of their virtuosity, essentially, were asked by the Patriarch of Jerusalem to patrol the roads and the holy cities and all of these different holy sites. And what happened is this turned into becoming one of the most organized and impressive groups of people in European history in many ways. And they were leaders because they took on a sense of responsibility. And this is where we see the comparison. You know, you have Navy SEALs and this desire to be a SEAL, desire to be a Marine and to serve the country. People see purpose behind that. The problem is when people, I should say men, seek just the ruggedness of it, of this competition. And I was just talking to someone this week, and they were talking about how within the SEALs, while the idea of joining the SEALs is something that is so wonderful, right? This honor to serve, but in reality, sometimes you see more so an attitude of competition and self-betterment divorced from virtue. And so when you have rugged masculinity lacking virtue, that's when we have the Weinsteins among other people. But when you bring the virtuous element of the Knights Templar, of many of our armed forces that are fighting, when you bring that element, you end up seeing an exemplary man who truly does change the culture around him.
Yeah, it's not just the fighting itself that is the thing. You have to have an ultimate meaning beyond that. You have to be able to give yourself away to something more. And I do think that is a little bit of an issue in our culture where people are like, well, men want to fight, and so they got the video games. But the video game is not actually something beyond yourself. If you're just doing it for your own personal record, or if you're just joining the armed forces so that you can be the best there is or whatever, that's not going to ultimately provide the meaning that we're talking about here. This is about giving yourself to a cause that is above and beyond you and has, I might add, an ultimate purpose. And, sort of to reference back to some of the stuff we talked about earlier in the show, I do think that that's the advertisers are trying to touch in, they're trying to grab into that. Yeah, you want to be part of something bigger, providing water or serving or doing all of this stuff. And again, my issue is, while they haven't actually provided the ultimate meaning, this is where Archbishop Chaput comes in and says it's the church. Ultimately, it's God that's got to provide that ultimate meaning. Like, you're not going to find that in temporal things. We can do our best, and I think we are trying to, sort of scavenge around and find something we can do, or we've given up on it, men especially. I mean, middle-aged men, the suicide rate among middle-aged men is skyrocketing. And it's ultimately a crisis of meaning in our culture that we don't have that overarching thing to give ourselves to. And we have to realize that's only going to come from God. That's only going to come from Jesus.
Right.
That has to be about giving yourself away to an eternal cause. And when you do that, all the rest of the stuff, I think, will fall into place.
Well, and how about this part? Archbishop Chaput ended up citing back to C.S. Lewis when he described Christianity as a fighting religion. This is something that I don't think just men embrace, but I think all people, we forget that we are in the midst of a spiritual warfare. And that it is not just the battle here of how we're struggling financially, what war is physically being fought, but a spiritual warfare. We talk about the warfare of principalities and powers, of, the fallen angels. But when we think about this, I always think about the monks. And I think about how the monks, it used to always be that when they'd pray, they'd either pray, and to this day, many of them do in the different orders, in a U or in two straight lines facing each other. And the idea was, and continues to be, is that as they're singing the Psalms, so any priest is required to pray the Liturgy of the Hours, also known as the Divine Office, throughout the day. So 6 times a day, you are praying these different prayers, morning, noon, and night, and in between. But as they pray, they chant back and forth. The one takes one stanza and then the next. And it's actually not just, oh, this sounds nice, and you also get a break for your voice, but it's that you are challenging the other men, the other prayers, the other warriors to spiritual battle, and that these Psalms are fortifying us. And I think that if we were to embrace these Psalms and really truly read them and see the element of spiritual and physical warfare as a part of it, I think that that really becomes more attractive. And that's where men see that they're called to a spiritual warfare that, as Archbishop Chaput talked about, embraces justice. It embraces courage, and that this is fundamental to the masculine Christian fighting spirit.
Yeah, not only does it, I think, provide that meaning, but it also makes sense of so much of life, right? Like, I think the culture tells us that your goal is to be as comfortable as possible, to get as much pleasure as possible, to have the least amount of pain as possible. Those are sort of what the culture puts on us. It says, if you don't have that stuff, you're not successful. And when you have all that stuff, that you're going to be happy. And we realize, on one hand, I think, at some level, that stuff doesn't actually provide us happiness. But on the other hand, where most of us are is that we're chasing after that, and something happens, and we have pain, and we have discomfort, and we don't have as much money as we need, and all of this stuff, and we have all of these troubles in life. And not only do we have all these troubles in life, but we don't have an overarching purpose to fight towards. And we're like, well, what's the point of all this? Whereas this model, where this is a spiritual war, where you're not actually, God didn't actually put you here to be comfortable. God didn't put you here to get as much pleasure as possible, to get the biggest TV possible, all that stuff. That's not your point. Your point is to get to heaven, and that requires a battle. And as with any battle, that's going to require some pain and some sacrifice and some suffering. And I think when men understand that, especially, I think all people, but when men get that, they're like, oh, you mean it's okay that I'm not comfortable right now, and I can fight through it, and I wasn't expected to be, and but ultimately, right? It transforms the way you view day-to-day circumstances. It also gives you purpose and meaning. Like, all right, well, if I am not supposed to be comfortable, but I'm supposed to be a fighter, what am I fighting for? Well, your family, to get them to heaven, get yourself to heaven, become virtuous, all of these things. And it really is a total change of perspective. But it's one that's, I think, very often lost, in our culture.
Well, and I look at this and I say, men, here's a challenge that you are looking for. Here's the meaning that you are looking for. Here's your opportunity to prove your worth, to prove that you are something. Who you are matters. And here's opportunity to see that there is a purpose higher than you maybe perceive within your own comfort, right? I think about Pope Benedict, right? And I think about Pope Benedict the 16th and a quote that I think so many of us will never forget. And he said, "The world offers you comfort. You were not made for comfort. You were made for greatness." And it's a reminder that even in our day-to-day, like, we can do more. There gets to a point where we're used to doing the same thing, and we might be doing great work, but we can do more. And I think that this is part of what is so excellent about the Catholic lifestyle. And as we're getting ready to enter into Lent, we have the opportunity to just embrace this idea that this Lent, I'm not going to just do something for 40 days. I'm going to make changes in my life, spiritual practices, good elements of responsibility and stewardship toward others that will change the culture around me.
Absolutely. We may cut this part out, but let me just add one before we leave Archbishop Chaput's excellent speech. Let me point out that he did have a few hints, or what did he put out here? He said,
I'd like to keep talking about this.
Did you want to come back to it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we get that men and women part in. All right, we'll come back to that then. I think we'll be fine.
It was about 11 minutes. Will be good with the intro.
Yeah, I'll put the longer intro.
Okay.
It'll be all right. Okay. So yeah, bring it in whatever you want.
You had something with men and women.
Well, I was just gonna.
I'm gonna come in real quick with Valiant.
Yeah. Okay.
As we continue our discussion about men and this awesome calling by Archbishop Chaput about men, I keep thinking about our sponsors here for Trending, which are Radiant and Valiant Magazine. Valiant Magazine is an excellent opportunity to look at this higher calling that men have in the culture, in their prayer life, in their physical, and mental endurance. And so I really want to encourage all of our listeners to check out this excellent magazine for young men. It is available by our Sunday visitor. You can find it at valiant.osv.com, or you can find Radiant for women at radiant.osv.com, again published by our Sunday visitor.
We have been talking about a speech that Archbishop Chaput gave in Arizona just recently, and you can find it at cruxnow.com, and we'll tweet it out. Follow Timmerie on Twitter to find all of the articles that we talk about. And some closing points that he made I thought were very good. He talked about the Knights Templar and how they joined not to escape the world, but to transform it, to convert the world by demanding everything a man had, every drop of his energy, love, talent, and intelligence, in service to a mission bigger and more important than any individual ego or appetite. What a great paragraph. That should be like tattooed on all of us. But I love not only the part about just a mission bigger than ourselves, but ultimately it's to convert the world. Mm-hmm. And again, I keep coming back to, you're not made for here and now ultimately. That's why it's not to be comfortable, right? If you're in the middle of a battle, you're in to win that battle for something, right? And what we're to get to heaven, and we're to get our families to heaven. And he transitions then talking about men and women and families, and how we shouldn't give into some of the cultural definitions of equality and some of the gender ideology that comes out. He talks about Christian equality and how it's not based on political ideology, but in the reality of the differences and mutual dependencies of real men and women. As creatures, we're designed to need each other, not replicate each other. And that's exactly right.
Awesome piece. Just read it again. We're designed to need each other, not to replicate each other. And this is what you're seeing today as people are getting all upset over the recent Super Bowl Doritos for Women commercial, or as people are getting upset over the difference in pay and the fact that women enter in and out of the workforce when men don't, which changes what the historically noted pay rate is between men and women. You have these different moments, and it breaks my heart because people are saying we have more to do for the fight over equality, but in reality, we have more to do in understanding that God created us male and female, and only in respecting those differences will we become better women, better men, and that makes a huge difference, and I think that in that recognition, in Archbishop Chaput reminding men that you may think in a different way from a woman, you may interact in a different way. That means that you cannot treat a woman as another one of the guys. And ladies, you can't treat a man as if he's going to behave on the same level as a woman. Not saying that you expect less from him, but you understand he is another human being that is born biologically a male. But that being said, he is proving his masculinity. And there actually is a point at one point in here where Archbishop Chaput talks about how anyone is born biologically a male, but you have the ability to essentially prove and grow and learn your masculinity, and how learning your masculinity and being mentored in it is something that's so important. And I mean, maybe you're someone who has a young son. He needs multiple examples of masculinity around him. Actually, one of my friends on social media this week posted a picture of her little boy, and posted a picture of her little boy with a bunch of her different brothers, different ages in life and family members. And part of the quote that she put up with it was that boys need examples of men. They need examples of young boys becoming men so that they can learn to see the transition that a man makes through the different parts of his life. Otherwise, that's why some men choose to be involved in gangs. and other different types of behavior, they're trying to prove that they're maturing. They're trying to prove that they're changing. And having those role models of a good transition through life are so important.
Yeah, and those role models, Archbishop Chaput goes on to talk about some of them and gives some principles to follow. Some that you'd think would be pretty common sense, but good reminders. Don't cheat on your wife. Don't put yourself in a situation where the idea would even occur to you, he said. Don't mislead and abuse women and damage your own dignity as a man by sleeping around before marriage. And if you're already doing that or did that, or toying with the idea of doing it, stop it now and get to confession. Just stop it and go to confession. But I like the perspective of when you're thinking about doing those things, if you even if you don't have a young son, and I have one, but just assume that you have one, right? Or assume that there's some young boy looking at you and just ask yourself, do I want that boy to emulate me? And if that boy does emulate me, is that going to be a good thing in the way I treat women, in the way I treat other people around him? And I think if we had that principle as men around us, and maybe I'm wrong because I know there's a lot of bad examples, but man, we got to think about that generation coming up because, like you said, they're becoming who they see, and so we have to be better at sticking with their mothers, for example.
Yeah, good male role models. And one of the notes, and I think that this is a great opportunity to think about as well, is Archbishop Chaput talks about how men were driven with this attractiveness to becoming a Capuchin or a Jesuit or these different religious orders. And he talks about, one of which that I'm a member of, this idea. And he talks about how when men have flocked to these different priestly orders, it's because they recognize, I'm going to quote him here, that they weren't escaping the world, but going to transform it. And he says, to convert the world by demanding everything a man had, every drop of his energy, love, talent, and intelligence, to service to a mission bigger and more important than any individual ego or appetite.
It's interesting that he thinks that that's going to be attractive, and he's right about that, that you would demand everything that a man has. It's interesting in some circles within Christianity, the idea is that, well, we don't demand, that we don't want to put up anything that would be demanding, especially of men. And we wonder why there's so few men in the church and why there's so few men teaching our youngsters. We don't have male teachers, in our Sunday schools and our catechism classes. And maybe it's because we haven't demanded enough of them, or the way that we've demanded it has been wrong. But I think largely, frankly, a lot of it in American Christianity, we have sort of tried to soft sell it or made it maybe more appealing to women perhaps or something, but men have not. I don't think we've had this great call within the church in America for men to just give up everything and we're going to demand this of you, because actually men respond pretty well to that sort of thing.
And I keep coming back to this conversation that I mentioned earlier, this idea of men are looking for this ruggedness. They like the ruggedness, right? But that ruggedness divorced from virtue is very problematic. And you look at things like going and volunteering with a bunch of kids for Sunday school, that seems very soft. It doesn't seem rugged. Right. But when you bring virtue in and see, like, the ruggedness is that I'm actually offering the sacrifice up on a Sunday. And at least for me, I personally don't enjoy spending a long period of time with young children. I volunteered for a vacation Bible school once, and my mom made me keep going back when I said, I'm not going back. Like, I get it. That is a sacrifice in and of itself,
Yes.
And I think that seeing that, again, that ruggedness with virtue is so important to the development of being a man.
Just a couple of minutes. Is this our fourth segment?
Yes, this is our fourth segment.
Should we quickly, some good news out of Hollywood. Maybe let's hit this quick while we're on the subject of sexual morality and male, what true masculinity is. Hopefully you realize that true masculinity is not found in stories like 50 Shades, which is unbelievable. Somebody at a church we used to go to actually offered, this was years ago, my wife, they were handing it around church to her. Can you imagine?
I will just say this. I have lost a tremendous amount of respect for people in my life who I know have read and gone to see these movies. Like, I'm sorry, I have just lost respect for them.
There's a line there somewhere.
There's a line.
She wasn't even familiar with it. She's like, she brought the book home, and I'm like, honey, since when do we bring porn? Like, she literally didn't. She's like, I don't know, somebody get. I'm like, no, yeah, that's. I'm not generally one to tell my wife what to read. She did not know what it was about, and she's like, people have been. I'm like, no, I don't think.
You
that's,
don't want to know those colors.
No, you don't want to know. Anyway, the Me Too movement apparently has had some effect. I was a little bit shocked at the Grammys, where the Me Too movement didn't seem to have any effect on some of the dancers. I'm like, can you not? Perhaps now it is starting. Some of these movies that have been in production, especially those that were picked up actually around that time when 50 Shades became popular, everybody's like, oh, we need the erotica. Basically, we need to put out our own mainstream porn. And some of those now are getting red lighted rather than green lighted. So hopefully.
Isn't it interesting?
Hopefully.
Well, and they're saying that basically 50 Shades of Grey may be the end of somewhat of an era, that this is the end of it for a while, because I mean, you see even the indie companies, which have never been skittish about covering things, are now all of a sudden being a little skittish. You've seen, A Star is Born, a remake by Warner Brothers, has been morphed from steamy to something far more chaste, as some people are saying. You see Hugh Hefner in the movie that was being made for him, that was totally red lighted. You have seen James Franco, and he was producing a stripper positive piece that is now, it's being claimed to be in development rather than working on it as much as it had been. But I could just go through naming list after list. Some independent producers who had an easy time funding some of their films before who aren't. You have even the story of Chippendales, which was coming out, the first all-women strip club, essentially, or for-women strip club. Even that is having a difficult time with funding and being in the process. So I think that we're seeing there is a sense of conscience taking place, even if it is just, and this is happening right now, the different agents are saying, hey, just ease up on any sexual oriented parts right now for your reputation.
Yeah, well, hey, we'll take it. I think that's good. Hopefully that continues and they start to see the basis of some of the revulsion we've had. All right, Timmerie, don't forget to go to timmerie.com and invite Timmerie to speak. I know we've got some gigs coming up. And Don Johnson at Ministries as well. We're very close to getting the movie ready for release this summer, so we'll keep you updated on that, and we will see you next time.
Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, thanks for joining us for this hour. We'll probably be back in about 15 minutes or so live again. You can join us sharing your thoughts and comments on any of the topics. I know one of the things we will be talking about coming up is marijuana and its impact. Maybe a little bit we'll see on yoga as well, and we will see you in a little bit.